Well, my title, obviously, being that I did video, is senior video on the show, senior video operator, as they say. Actually, what it, in fact, most people don't know is that it's the other half of the horse of the camera team. The cameraman mainly focuses, frames the camera, and does the positioning. But the coloring aspect of it, the exposure, and the matching of the cameras is done by the senior video person, which that's what I had done on Dark Shadows. Dark Shadows was very interesting for many reasons, video-wise, because up to that time, most television programs wanted to have a certain amount of light, certain exposure, a certain look to it that was much brighter than Dark Shadows. Dark Shadows was very interesting in the fact that it used a lot of moody lighting, which was very, very different. There was some jokes always made about it. As long as something in the picture that you were monitoring made 100% video, it was okay. And so specifically, a lot of times when props would put out things and the set decorator would have certain things that they necessarily were putting on the set, there would be certain lighting features that would allow for certain things to reflect enough light so that it would say, okay, it's within specification, therefore the lighting is okay. But mostly it was up to the lighting director in concert with the scenics and video to determine what the picture was really going to look like. And as I said before, with Shadows, it was very unique in the fact that it used a lot of moody type lighting, which you see obviously in movies. As far as lighting goes on this show, it was very interesting because most lighting is generally higher key. By that I mean there's not a great difference between the highlights and lowlights. In other words, they keep the contrast ratio very narrow so that you see everything on the set. Nothing is sort of hidden or in the shadows. But because obviously the name of the show was Dark Shadows, it had to give you a different type of a mood. So Mel Handelsman, who primarily was the lighting director on the show, did an excellent job of getting the lighting effects and conveying a mood that the actors themselves realized was something special, something more than what they were used to in working in a television show. In concert with the scenic people, video, and the producer and director of the show, it took that many people in order to produce this product. It was no one person's idea fully carried out. Everybody contributed to it. And so it made for a real nice working relationship. The show, of course, used a lot of different effects that weren't used very much in television, because you have to realize at this point in time, television was coming out of being done live or live on tape. But the live on tape segment of it was such that it really was if you were doing the show in real time. It was shot that way. It wasn't shot as most shows are today, where they're segmented. They do a scene, put that in the can, and then you go on to the next scene, and then in editing, you put the whole thing together, much like films are done. But the mentality of that era was that you shoot it as if it was a real show going on the air right now. Ironically, at times, when we were taping the show, it would be at the time Dark Shadows was physically on the air, and sometimes even the commercials would come up in the same time frame. So that was kind of interesting. We did use what is known as chroma key. Chroma key, for the most part, is the same thing that's been used in movie techniques for years and years and years, and it could either be green screen technique or blue screen. Well, in Dark Shadows, we used a lot of different type effects to give a little different mood and feel to the show. One of those effects was blue screen or chroma key in television. And what that in essence does is you have a person or object in front of a blue screen, which is later mated to a background. And sometimes that can take the, how I would say, I'll back up a little bit. Chroma key basically is a process in which you take something you want to take from a scene, isolate it, and map it into something that is not physically there. One typical thing would be, say, a head, where somebody would be dressed in blue, and only their head be showing in the actual picture. And you want to map that on something else. So that's how we did some things that look like they were flying real heads, or a bat, or whatever. It wasn't used very often in television up to that time. There were special shows, of course, that made use of it, but it wasn't on a daily basis. Dark Shadows was interesting in the fact that it was used, and used often. Okay, chroma key was used in a lot of different ways. One, as I can remember, was used with two of the characters where they were in a room and just disappear. They were brought into a room, sort of like dissolved in. First of all, you see a room by itself, and magically they appear in the room, and they're able to go around and touch things. They physically weren't on that particular part of the set. They were on another part of the set. And the idea is that they were to interact in that set, but as ghosts. And one of the easiest ways of doing that was with chroma key, because you could give them a sort of a transparent look as well. Dark Shadows was very realistic. Now, of course, in film, they try to make things realistic, and they're not very realistic. However, on this show, the scenic people did such a great job that when you went on that set, you were amazed of how realistic it is, even though going up to it, you would realize after knocking on it that it was really only a set piece. But even the bricks came out, as far as the viewer is concerned, looked like really bricks. And on the set, you really have to go very, very close up to realize that they are not. The show was very realistic visually. Some sets that were used in other soap operas, you can tell they were not exactly real. They conveyed, say if you were in a library, that they would have many books there, and they would look like real books, except that in some instances they were really painted. In Shadows, they wouldn't have used painted books. They'd actually use books on a bookshelf. They took a lot of pains and efforts to make it look realistic and to create something that was not seen in ordinary television up to that point, especially for daytime television. Obviously, with a show that runs day in and day out, the costs could be quite high. And for something like this to get a realistic nature, there was always a force there saying, you know, cut the budget back a little bit. Maybe you can do without this chandelier or that light or this chair. But for the most part, Dark Shadows, I don't know how they did it, but for the most part, they were able to use what they wanted to use and still pretty much get in budget as what was considered nominal for doing a daytime soap opera. Again, most people that worked on the show, both I think from an actor point of view and from a technical point of view, considered it as just another job, a show. They didn't realize at the time that it would have such an impact on the public, which of course, as we know now, it has. Otherwise, we wouldn't be watching it or talking about it these days. So it played a special point, or a special part in my life too, since it was the first show that I had gotten network credits on. So for me, it was something very, very special. And for a lot of other people out there, it's very, very special, near to their heart.